The dawn over Cape Esperance, 1943, broke in a smear of gray fog and distant thunder. The sea was calm, deceptively calm, broken only by the silhouettes of Allied ships anchored in a defensive arc offshore. They had survived the night, barely. Japanese night raider destroyers had slipped in undercover darkness, hammering the anchorage with naval gunfire before vanishing back into the mist. On the battered shoreline, among broken palm trunks and splintered crates, a lone field gun crew struggled to get their M2, a 105mm Howitzer, into firing position. Mud sucked at their boots. Salt spray stung their eyes. The world smelled of cordite, brine, and frustration. At the center of it all stood Sergeant Daniel Keene, 28 years old, artilleryman from rural Oregon, quiet, sharp-eyed, usually unshakable. But right now he squinted into the fog, like a man trying to see across the entire Pacific. Behind him, Corporal Finch kicked the base plate free of sand. "Sergeant, we can't fire blind," he protested. "We don't even know where they are. No spotter, no radio fix, nothing." Keene didn't respond immediately. He kept one hand on the gun's breech, the other shading his eyes. Somewhere beyond the fog, beyond 5 kilometers of empty water, a Japanese supply ship, likely a fast auxiliary transport, was limping away from the night's attack. If it escaped, it would return with more ammunition and reinforcements. The anchorage couldn't survive another night like this one. Private Calder pointed toward the horizon. "Sir, fog's thickening. We'll lose all visibility in 5 minutes." Finch threw up his hands. "This is insane. Even with the spotter, hitting a moving ship at this range is..." "Not our job to question," Keene interrupted quietly. But that wasn't the full truth. He knew what they were attempting was nearly impossible. A blind, indirect shot against a moving naval target 5 kilometers offshore? Even naval guns, massive stabilized radar guided, had trouble achieving that in poor visibility. A 105mm field gun on a muddy beach? With a crew running on 2 hours of sleep? With no forward observer? It bordered on myth. Another impact echoed across the bay. The sound of distant engines throttling up, Japanese destroyers pulling back, escorting the wounded supply vessel. Calder swallowed. "Sir, they're getting away." Keene finally stepped back from the gun, jaw tightening. "If that ship escapes," he said, "they'll be back tonight, and we won't walk away from the second round." Finch shook his head. "Then what do we do?" "Guess." Keene adjusted the Howitzer's elevation wheel. Then he kicked a wooden crate under the trail legs for stability. Then he looked at the fog again, not with despair, but with calculation, because he wasn't entirely blind. He remembered the way the destroyers had retreated after firing. He remembered the echo pattern of their last salvo. He remembered the swell angle of the tide as it pulled the surf diagonally, not straight, back toward the open ocean. He remembered sound, and sound could be geometry. He pointed toward the horizon. "She's damaged. She'll take the straightest line to deeper water." With her engine tone fading at that rate, he rotated the Howitzer left 2 degrees. "She should be right about here." Finch stared. "You're guessing based on noise?" Keene ignored him. "Load." His voice was steady. "Elevation, 1,220 mils. Traverse, 2 left. Fuse quick." Calder hesitated, then obeyed. Round and Keene stepped to the landing. For the first time that morning, the crew fell silent. Even the waves seemed to pause. Finch whispered, "If this misses..." Keene answered without turning, "It won't." He pulled. Boom. The Howitzer recoiled violently. The blast punched a hole through the fog bank, sending a ripple across the sea. For 5 seconds, nothing. Then 8. Then 12. Finch exhaled shakily. "So maybe we show..." A distant flash, barely visible through the fog, bloomed on the horizon, followed by a muffled whomp that rolled across the bay moments later. Calder's jaw dropped. "No way. And oh, wait, that's the supply ship." Finch's face went pale. "Sergeant, what did you just do?" Keene lowered the lanyard slowly. What he didn't say, not yet, was that the first hit had ignited the ship's forward deck stores, and that the Japanese escort destroyers were already turning around, desperate, confused, and suddenly very aware that the Americans were not as blind as they appeared, and the next 40 minutes would decide whether Keene's impossible shot became legend, or his epitaph. For a full heartbeat after the explosion rolled across the bay, the gun crew simply stared, half convinced they had imagined it. The fog swallowed the horizon again almost instantly, as if trying to hide the truth of what had just happened. Finch broke the silence first. "That was luck," he whispered. "It had to be luck." But Sergeant Daniel Keene didn't answer, not because he disagreed, but because he didn't have time to. The Japanese supply ship was hit, yes, but not sinking, not yet, and the escort destroyers, previously retreating, were now reversing course. Their engine rumbled, growing louder through the fog. Calder crouched behind the shield. "Sir, if they get a bearing on our position." "They're going to," Keene said calmly. "They have radio. They have star shells. They have ranging guns." Finch grabbed Keene's sleeve. "So what do we do? Pull back? Move the gun?" Keene shook his head. "Too late. They'll fire illumination rounds the second they think we're here. We can't outrun light." He stepped forward and placed a hand on the steel trail of the Howitzer, as if steadying a nervous horse. "We hit the supply ship again, before they reach her." Calder stared. "Hit her again? We can't even see her." Keene knelt in the sand and began drawing rough shapes. "Visibility doesn't matter," he said. "Movement patterns do." Reconstructing the target, using only sound and water. Keene motioned the men closer. "Listen," he ordered. They went silent. Across the water, faint but unmistakable, came the uneven pulse of a damaged diesel engine. Hiccuping, laboring, misfiring. Calder nodded slowly. "That's her. She's limping." Keene pointed to the waves. "Watch the surf. Notice the angle?" The men followed his gaze. The tide was moving diagonally along the shoreline, pulling southeast. "She'll ride the current," Keene said. "She's wounded. They won't risk turning her broadside." Finch frowned hard. "So you're telling me you can hear where she's going?" Keene stood, brushed sand from his knees. "No, I'm telling you I can think where she's going." He adjusted elevation 1 mil, then 2, then added another. Calder HET again. "Fuse quick." Calder swallowed. "Yes, sir." The destroyers react and complicate everything. Before the round could be loaded, a sudden violent crack split the sky. A Japanese illumination shell burst overhead, turning the fog into a glowing dome of white. The shoreline lit up in ghostly brightness. The Howitzer and its crew stood exposed, every silhouette sharp against the pale haze. Finch cursed. "They've got us sighted." A second illumination round burst behind the first, then a third. The fog glittered with drifting sparks. It was impossible to hide. Keene didn't flinch. "Load it." The destroyers fired blind toward the beach. 3 heavy shells. Home, home, home. Each one landed 200 meters short, sending geysers of seawater towering into the fog. Calder rammed the shell home, round and Keene took the lanyard, eyes narrowing as he recalculated drift, tide, pull, and the ship's probable turn rate. If that engine tone drops by another quarter frequency. He rotated traverse 2 notches right. She's trying to angle into deeper water. Finch could barely breathe. "Sergeant, if we fire now and we're wrong." Keene didn't let him finish. "We won't be wrong." He pulled the lanyard. Boom. Seconds stretch into forever. The blast shook the sand. The shell arced into fog thick enough to feel. The men waited. 8 seconds. 10. 14. Nothing. Finch exhaled shakily. "That's a miss." Keene held up a hand. "Wait." The fog shifted, just slightly, revealing a faint orange flicker far out at sea. Then another. Then a larger one. Calder's eyes widened. "She's burning." "You hit the aft deck this time." But their victory was cut short by a new, chilling sound. The high-pitched shriek of incoming naval shells. The destroyers had found their range. Keene's voice snapped like a whip. "Down." Crock-a-miform. Crash. The beach exploded in 3 overlapping blasts, showering the crew with sand and shrapnel. The Howitzer rocked on its trails. Yates coughed. "They're walking the fire toward us." 30 meters of salvo. Keene stood immediately, prepared to reposition. Finch grabbed him. "We can't move the gun under fire." "We're not moving it far," Keene said. "We're rotating it." Finch blinked. "Rotating to what?" Keene looked at the fog, listened to the waves, listened to the failing engine of the stricken ship. He whispered, to finish the job. The fog glowed white from the drifting illumination rounds, turning the beach into something unreal. A stage lit for a performance no man wanted to be part of. The Japanese destroyers had the range now. Each new salvo crept closer, shells shrieking overhead and slamming into the sand with brutal force. Croctum, a geyser of mud and seawater lifted 20 feet high. Croctum, another slam just beyond the tree line. The next one would hit the gun line. Calder ducked as shrapnel hissed past him. Sergeant, we gotta get out of here. He didn't answer right away. He stood beside the Howitzer, studying the fog as if it were a map only he could read. Finch grabbed him by the arm. Keene, they'll walk the next salvo right into our teeth. Keene stepped free. If we abandon this gun now, that supply ship survives. And if that ship survives, every man on this beach dies tonight. He spun the traverse sharply. Help me rotate. Re-aiming under fire. Finch and Calder threw their weight against the trail legs. The Howitzer groaned as it pivoted through the wet sand. Every degree felt like a mile. Keene adjusted elevation again. Just a hair, barely a movement. Dwyer shouted over the chaos. You already hit her twice. She has to sink. But Keene shook his head. No, she's still moving. No secondary explosion. Her cargo's intact. Finch's eyes went wide. You think they're carrying ammunition? Keene didn't answer, which was answer enough. A new sound changes everything. Suddenly, a deep, rhythmic thumping pulsed through the fog. Not the damaged supply ship. Something else. Calder swallowed. Sir, what is that? Keene turned slightly, listening with unnerving intensity. That, he said, is one of the destroyers accelerating. Finch paled. They're charging us? No, Keene said quietly. They're shielding the supply ship with their hull. Finch blinked. Why would they do that? Keene's jaw tightened. Because they know one more hit might detonate her cargo. Dwyer muttered a prayer. So now we have to shoot through a destroyer? Keene shook his head. No, we shoot around it. The impossible solution. Keene dropped to one knee in the sand and began drawing arcs with his finger. The destroyer's bow angle is 40 degrees. She's not turning sharply, she's screening. That means she's moving parallel between us and the target. Finch stared. You can't arc a shell around a ship. No, Keene said. But you can predict where she'll not be. He pointed at a blank space in the fog. The destroyer can only protect one side at a time. Her width is fixed. The supply ship is drifting with the current. She's moving out of the destroyer's shadow zone slowly. Calder's face lit with realization. So you're not firing blind. You're firing into a window. Keene nodded once. Yes, and that window will close in under 30 seconds. Shells impact closer. Time is running out. The next Japanese salvo screamed in. Crockham, 20 meters behind them. Dwyer flinched. They've dialed us in. Keene didn't look back. Load, HET. Fuse quick. Now. Calder rammed the round in with trembling hands. Round in. Finch shouted. Sergeant. The destroyer's almost covering her again. Keene braced himself. One hand gripping the trail, the other poised on the lanyard. If this one misses, we won't get another shot. The crew froze. Sand shifted beneath their boots. Fog swirled. The damaged engine throbbed. Fainter, weaker. The destroyer thundered in parallel. The illumination rounds hissed overhead. Keene listened, not with his ears alone, but with memory, instinct, geometry, and desperation interwoven. Traverse one notch right, he said. Finch obeyed. Elevation plus 2 mils. Calder adjusted. Keene exhaled. Stand clear. The shot that shouldn't work. The crew stepped back. Keene pulled the lanyard. Boom. The Howitzer slammed rearward in recoil, sand erupting around its base. The shell vanished into the fog. 5 seconds. 7 seconds. 10. Finch whispered. Come on, come on. Then, a flash. But not on the surface. A pillar of fire shot upward, piercing the fog like a torch. A second later, a thunderous rolling explosion tore across the bay. Deeper, sharper, angrier than the first two. Calder nearly fell backward. That's it. That's her cargo. You hit the hold. Then, another explosion. Then another. The supply ship's silhouette, faint but visible through flashes. Folded inward as internal charges detonate. Finch stared in shock. You threaded a shell between a destroyer and a drifting ship in fog at 5 kilometers. Keene lowered the lanyard slowly. No, he said. We threaded it. The destroyers react. Too late. The Japanese destroyers panicked. One sped toward the explosion, engines screaming. The other fired blindly, flailing for the gun that had just crippled their resupply effort. But Keene raised his hand. Hold position. They're not firing accurately anymore. He was right. Their ranging was shattered by the detonating ship, the broken echoes, the shock waves bouncing off fog and surf. They were deaf, blind, guessing. And for the first time that morning, Keene saw fear, not on his own side, but in the confusion of the enemy's responses. He stepped back from a gun. That, he said quietly, buys us the breathing room we needed. The supply ship's burning silhouette flickered weakly through the fog, a dying heartbeat of orange light swallowed by smoke and rolling mist. Each explosion within her hold echoed across the bay like distant thunder, gradually weakening, gradually falling silent. But the threat was nowhere near over, because now, with their resupply crippled and their honor wounded, the Japanese destroyers weren't retreating. They were hunting. Calder crouched low behind the Howitzer's shield. Sergeant, they're coming fast. Finch scanned the fog, hearing the engine roar swell from a dull thrum to a rising, furious crescendo. God, they're angry, Finch muttered. And they're coming straight for us. Keene didn't argue. He didn't even blink. He stepped to the waterline, listening, not to the engines themselves, but to how their echoes bounced off the cliffs behind the beach. He raised a hand. Both destroyers are maneuvering, he said. One circling wide. The other is committing to a run along the bay. Finch's eyes widened. They're trying to bracket us with crossfire from the water? Keene nodded. Worse, they're going to rake the shoreline with their deck guns. They think we're preparing another salvo. Dwyer looked at the Howitzer. Its barrel still warm, its trails half buried in sand. Are we? Keene shook his head. No, we're doing something else. Keene's next move isn't to fire, it's to vanish. Keene knelt beside the trail legs. Get ready to drag the gun backward 2 meters, quietly. Finch blinked. Sergeant, 2 meters isn't enough to hide us. It's enough to throw off their firing solution. Dwyer frowned. I thought destroyers had radar? Not here, Keene said. Mikawa's flotillas rely on spotters and illumination. Radar units are scarce, and the terrain plays hell with readings. The destroyers' engines thundered louder, a rising, shaking roar that vibrated the sand beneath their boots. Calder hissed. Sir, they're lining up a broadside. Keene raised a flat palm. On me. Move the gun. Now. The crew heaved. The Howitzer slid through the mud and sand with a wet sucking sound, moving just far enough to shift its silhouette against the illuminated fog. Keene pointed urgently. Flank around the left. Everyone down. The first broadside, a wall of fire. The destroyer unleashed its barrage. Crack-a-tum-tum-tum. A line of 5-inch naval shells ripped across the beach in a sweeping arc, throwing sand, debris, and seawater into the air like a tidal wave. But the rounds hit where the gun used to be, not where it was now. Finch coughed violently, choking on powdered sand. If we hadn't moved, Keene cut him off. We did. Stay low. Another illumination round burst overhead. This one brighter, sharper. Its magnesium flare cutting through fog like a blade. Dwyer squinted. They're trying to force us into contrast. Calder pointed with terror. Sir, they're turning again, lining up another run. Keene's face hardened. They won't get the chance. The countershot no gun crew should attempt. Keene stood, wiped the fog from his brow, and stepped toward the Howitzer. Finch grabbed him. Sergeant, what are you doing? We can't fire on a destroyer. The gun can't depress far enough, even if we hit. We're not aiming at the destroyer, Keene said. Finch froze. Then what? Keene pointed at the fog beyond the destroyer's bearing. The waterline, where she will be. Calder's jaw dropped. You're leading a target we can't even see? Keene adjusted the Howitzer's angle with controlled, precise movements. A destroyer making an attack run has to commit to a predictable arc. She can't swerve without losing her firing line. Finch stared at him, as if seeing him for the first time. "You're calculating naval interception geometry, with no spotter, on a field gun." Keene slid the elevation into position. "Calder load HED." Calder hesitated. "Sir, if this misses." "If this misses," Keene said, "she rolls up to the sand and cuts us in half." Calder rammed the round home. Rounded, the shot fired into a wall of fog. Keene gripped the lanyard. The wind shifted, barely detectable, but enough to matter. He made one final micro-adjustment. "Stand clear." The crew ducked behind shattered crates. Keene pulled. Boom. The shell screamed into the fog. A second passed. 2, 4. Then something collided. Not metal on metal, not a direct hit, but a violent churning impact that sent up a column of white spray. Finch stared. "Well, what did you hit?" Keene didn't answer. He was listening again. The destroyer's engines roared, then suddenly leveled into a lower pitch. She was a slowing. No, she was reversing. Calder gasped. "You forced her to abort the run." Keene shook his head. "That's not all." Because now that she was reversing, her maneuvers were predictable. Her engine pitch, her prop wash, the direction of her turn. Keene had her locked. He stepped to the gun again. Reload. The destroyer's engines groaned through the fog as she reversed hard, churning the water into a foaming white wake. Her captain had abandoned the attack. Run. The instant the American shell struck the sea directly in her projected path. Not a hit, but a warning. And a warning from a 105mm field gun fired blind from 5 kilometers away. It was not something a naval officer dismissed as luck. Finch crouched beside the gun shield, eyes wide. "Sergeant, she's scared of us." Keene corrected him softly. "She's cautious." That's different and more dangerous. The destroyer, now moving stern first, angled into a defensive pattern, using the fog bank as her shield. Her gunners began firing sporadic suppression rounds, not to hit anything, but to keep the beach pinned. Croctum. Shells burst farther offshore now, a sign of disorientation. She no longer knew where the American gun really was. Keene checked the wind direction again, barely adrift, and the muffled pitch of the destroyer's engines. "They're repositioning," he said, "trying to get parallel with the shoreline again." Finch blinked. "But why?" "They know we'll fire." "That's exactly why," Keene said. "They think we'll hesitate under pressure." He stepped to the Howitzer. "We won't." The destroyer tries a new tactic, smoke screening. A low hiss rose over the water. Calder frowned. "What's that noise?" Keene stiffened. "Smoke generators. They're laying screen." A thick wall of white smoke began spreading across the bay, merging with the fog into a single opaque curtain. The destroyer was turning broadside behind it. Hidden, protected, preparing a fresh bearing. Finch slammed a fist into the sand. "Damn it. Now we have nothing. No sound, no visual. How do we fire blind through smoke and fog?" But Keene was already kneeling, drawing shapes again. Not ships this time, sound cones. "The smoke works against them," he said. "It diffuses their own bearing signals. Every time they fire or change speed, the sound spreads unevenly." Dwyer stared. Meaning I can tell exactly when they commit to a new firing line. The moment the fog betrays the enemy. A faint tremor rolled across the water. Something subtle. Easy to miss unless one is trained to hear it. "Keene," whispered. "There." Finch blinked. "What do you mean there?" "I don't hear anything." "You're listening for volume," Keene said. "I'm listening for shape." The destroyer's bow is cutting water at a sharper angle. She's accelerating into a turn. Dwyer's face lit with realization. She's opening a firing lane. Keene nodded, and she just revealed her direction of travel. The second impossible shot begins. Calder loaded another HET round. Round in, Keene adjusted elevation a mere fraction, then checked drift by dropping a pinch of sand. There was no wind, only the thick, clinging moisture of fog and smoke. Good. That meant the shell's arc wouldn't drift off course. Finch swallowed hard. What if the destroyer doesn't fully commit to the run? Keene locked the breech. She already has. He motioned to them. Clear. The crew ducked. Keene pulled the lanyard. Boom. The gun's recoil slammed into the mud. The shell tore into the fog, vanishing instantly, for seconds. 6, 9, nothing. Finch exhaled in defeat. Mississippi. Calder shook his head. No, Sergeant wouldn't miss twice. Keene, still listening, raised one finger. Wait, the hit nobody expected. A sudden metallic crack sliced through the fog, then a booming echo off the cliffs. Finch froze. What was that? Calder's eyes widened. Deflection. That was a deflection off her bow plating. Keene nodded. She turned into the shot. Exactly as predicted. Finch nearly collapsed. Jesus Christ. You bounced a shell off a destroyer at 5 kilometers. But the miracle wasn't the deflection. It was what came next. The destroyer's engine surged. Not toward the beach, but away. Dwyer pointed. She's retreating. No, Keene corrected. She's repositioning for a stern retreat. They're abandoning offensive posture. Finch looked stunned. You forced off a destroyer attack with 2 blind artillery shots. Keene shook his head. That's not the destroyer that worries me. Finch blinked. What could be worse? Keene pointed toward the smokescreen. The other destroyer. The one we haven't heard for 2 minutes. A new danger and a sudden realization. The silence was terrifying. Destroyers didn't go silent unless they were drifting. They were listening. They were planning something extremely violent. Keene's face hardened. They're going to bombard the beach simultaneously. One from the east, one from the west. A cross pattern. Finch looked sick. We'll be caught in a perfect kill box. Unless, Keene said quietly, we hit them first. Calder's eyes widened. You're not serious. But Keene was already adjusting elevation again. Not toward the first destroyer. Not toward the burning supply ship, but toward the silent space where the second destroyer was hiding. Using fog as a veil, Dwyer whispered, how can you hit what you can't detect? Keene's answer was almost too calm. She made one mistake. What mistake? Keene pointed at the waterline, where barely visible lines of ripples spread outward at a shallow angle. She changed speed, and the sea tells the truth. He stepped back to the gun, load the final round. The fog over Cape Esperance felt heavier now, as if the air itself recognized that something irreversible was about to happen. Calder slid the shell into the breach with trembling hands. Round and Keene locked it. Then he did something the crew had never seen him do. He closed his eyes. Finch whispered, Sergeant. Keene raised one hand for silence. He wasn't thinking about the gun, or the beach, or the shells slamming into the water in the distance. He was listening to time, the faint throb of an engine at low RPM, the pulse of the surf hitting a hull displaced, just so, the ripple pattern moving against current, barely visible but unmistakable. And one more detail, the silent destroyer was adjusting trim, shifting ballast to bring her bow down for a more stable firing line, which meant her next move would be a hard acceleration into broadside position. Keene opened his eyes. She's lining up on us. The crew looked at one another in panic. Finch sputtered. We can't outshoot a destroyer that sees us before we fire. Keene didn't argue. He simply said, we won't give her the chance. The geometry of a ghost. Keene adjusted the Howitzer's elevation knob one final time, a movement so small it looked meaningless. Then he rotated the traverse 3 notches left. Calder frowned. Sir, that's nowhere near her. Keene shook his head. She's not there yet. Finch grabbed his shoulder. Keene, if you fire wrong. Keene turned, and for the first time that morning, his voice sharpened. If I'm wrong, we die. If I'm right, they never fire another shell at this beach. Finch fell silent. The destroyer commits. From inside the fog came a sudden roar, a violent surge of engine power. The silent destroyer had committed to her run. That one engine spike told Keene everything. Her heading, her angle of approach, her acceleration curve, the arc she must complete to open her guns. He whispered, now, the final shot. The crew ducked. Keene pulled the landing. Boom. The howitzer thundered, sliding back in the mud. The shell vanished into the opaque whiteness. Finch covered his head. Oh God, oh God. 8 seconds. 10. 12. Nothing. Then a flash. A small one, low near the waves. Then a bigger one. Then a massive plume of black smoke billowed upward, thick and violent. Calder's jaw dropped. You hit her. You hit her forward engine compartment. But the destroyer wasn't finished. A secondary explosion, deeper, metallic, blew through her forward deck. Dwyer shouted, "That's her starboard boiler. Holy hell, she's dead in the water." The fog parted just enough to reveal her silhouette, listing, burning, slowing, turning helplessly with the current. Finch stared at Keene in disbelief. You found her with nothing but sound?" Keene didn't answer, because something else was happening. The first destroyer reacts. The other destroyer, the one previously retreating, spun hard, engine screaming as she rushed to aid her crippled sister. Finch panicked. "She's coming straight for us, full speed." Calder looked to Keene, terrified. "What now, Sergeant?" "We don't have ammunition left." Keene didn't reach for the gun. He stepped forward toward the surf. "Now," he said, "we let the sea finish the fight." Dwyer blinked. "You see," Keene pointed at the drifting wake of the burning destroyer. "She is blocking the channel. The second destroyer can't break in time." Finch's voice cracked. "You mean?" "Yes," Keene said. "She'll collide." The collision. Through the thinning fog, they saw it. The healthy destroyer barreling toward her crippled sister, unable to turn tightly enough to avoid her. A warning horn blared. Crewmen shouted. Engines screamed in reverse. Too late. Crane and crunch. The two ships met in a violent, grinding impact. A collision that tore open steel plates and buckled decks. Flames jumped from one to the other. Sailors scrambled in chaos. The bay erupted with steam, smoke, shouts, alarms. Finch stared in awe. "You didn't just hit a ship. You turned two destroyers into wrecks." Calder whispered, "The entire attack force neutralized by a field gun." Dwyer looked at Keene. "How did you even?" Keene stepped back from the shore. "We're done here," he said quietly. "And we're alive. That's enough." The fog clears, and the crew finally sees what they did. As the sun burned through the morning fog, the gun crew finally saw the full scene. The supply ship sinking in bubbling smoke. One destroyer burning and listing. The other tangled against her hull, both unable to maneuver. Oil slicks spreading across the bay. No remaining Japanese guns aiming back at the beach. Calder whispered, "Sir, this is impossible." Keene exhaled. "No, just unlikely." For several long minutes after the collision, the only sounds were fire crackling on steel and the distant hiss of boiling seawater. The Japanese guns had fallen silent. Their engines sputtered, coughed, or died completely. What had begun as a coordinated assault to finish off an isolated American anchorage had turned into a chaotic disaster they never saw coming. Keene finally stepped back from the shoreline, shoulders sagging with exhaustion. Finch approached him slowly. "Sergeant, is it over?" Keene didn't answer right away. He scanned the horizon again, out of habit, not doubt, listening for the telltale rumble of reinforcements, a fresh wave of destroyers, or even scout planes. But there was nothing, only the soft crash of waves against the hulls of two crippled ships. "Yeah," Keene said at last. "It's over." But he didn't sound relieved, more like a man waking up from trance. The crew realizes the magnitude of what they survived. Calder slumped to the sand, laughing shakily. We survived a naval duel with a field gun." Finch corrected him. "No, he fought a naval duel. We just loaded the shells." Keene turned. "That's not how this works. This gun doesn't fire without you." Finch gestured wildly at the bay. "Sergeant, we fired 5 shots. 5. And you destroyed their supply ship, forced off one destroyer, and crippled the other into a collision." Dwyer shook his head. "I still don't understand half of what you were doing. You were hearing things I couldn't even." Keene interrupted quietly. "Everyone hears it. Most people don't know what they're listening for." But even he knew that was only half true. He had been calculating angles most field gunners never dreamed of. He had been interpreting sound as geometry. He had been mapping the fog like a chart. And now that adrenaline was fading, the cost hit him like a bruise. He sank to one knee, exhaustion overtaking pride. Calder rushed to his side. "Sir, are you hurt?" Keene waved him off. "No, just tired. That's all." But Finch wasn't convinced. "Sergeant, We thought that first shot was luck. The second was a miracle. The third, he looked out at the wrecked destroyers. The third shouldn't even be possible. Keene closed his eyes. It wasn't luck, and it wasn't miracles. It was math. The tide brings the evidence ashore. As the sun climbed higher, the tide began to push debris toward the beach. Shattered planks, pieces of lifeboats, fragments of hull plate. But one object drifted in more slowly, bobbing on the waves until it finally bumped against the sand. A Japanese navigation board charred around the edges. Keene picked it up. It showed the exact attack pattern the destroyers had intended to use. Parallel runs, crossfire arcs, kill zones. Finch let out a long breath. They had us boxed in. Keene nodded. They almost did. Dwyer pointed to the chart. If this is their plan, then your blind shots broke their whole attack before it even started. Keene didn't smile. He didn't rebel. He simply folded the charred board and set it aside. Let's get the gun back under cover, he said. There's still a war going on. The moment command finally sees what happened. 2 hours later, a patrol boat arrived from the anchorage, its crew staring wide-eyed at the burning silhouettes offshore. The lieutenant in charge stepped onto the sand. What in God's name happened here? We saw explosions from halfway across the bay. Finch answered. Sir, Sergeant Keene happened. Keene moved to attention, trying to compose himself. Enemy supply ship attempted to withdraw. Destroyers attempted pursuit of our position. We engaged with HET at approximately 5,000 meters. The lieutenant blinked. You engaged destroyers? Yes, sir. With this? The officer gestured to the Howitzer. Yes, sir. The lieutenant rubbed his face. Sergeant, destroyers don't fight field guns. Keene corrected him softly. They do, sir, when they think the field gun can't hit back. Dwyer muttered under his breath. They won't be making that assumption again. A quiet walk among wreckage. Later that afternoon, Keene stood alone at the shore as the tide carried more debris toward land. Burned paper, twisted steel, a life buoy marked with kanji. He didn't feel triumph, just gravity. Finch joined him. What are you thinking, Sarge? Keene didn't look away from Rex. 5 shots, he said quietly. 5 shots changed the whole day. Finch considered this. You think command will believe it? Keene shrugged. They'll believe the Rex. But he knows what comes next. Keene turned to his men. Get ready to relocate. They'll send aircraft once they realize their ships didn't return. Finch sighed. And what then? Keene stared at the gun. Then we do what we always do. We fire. We adapt. We stay alive. Calder laughed softly. Yeah, but maybe next time we aim at something we can actually see. Keene smiled faintly for the first time since dawn. That'd be nice. By sunset, the smoke above Cape Esperance thinned into streaks of gray drifting across a calm, glassy sea. The 2 crippled Japanese destroyers, one sleek, fast, and lethal, now sat dead in the water, listing helplessly as their surviving crew scrambled into lifeboats. The supply ship had already slipped beneath the waves hours earlier, leaving only an oil slick and shattered crates to mark the spot where she died. It was a scene no one on the American beach would ever forget, not because they won a naval engagement, but because they had no business fighting one at all. And yet, against every law of probability and doctrine, a single 105mm field gun crew had shattered a 3-ship operation, with 5 blind shots in a fog thick enough to choke on. When word of the battle reached battalion headquarters, the first response was disbelief. A captain reading the initial radio report muttered, "Someone needs to rewrite this. Field guns don't sink ships." But when reconnaissance confirmed the wrecks, disbelief turned into stunned respect. The official report later stated, enemy vessels withdrew or were rendered combat ineffective due to indirect fire of exceptional accuracy. There was no mention of fog, no mention of improvisation, no mention of the sound geometry Keene had mapped in his mind, and no mention of his name. But the men who served with him remembered. Legacy of a shot no one should have attempted. In the weeks that followed, American troops pushed deeper into contested waters and island chains without facing the same level of nighttime harassment from Japanese raiders. The loss of the auxiliary supply ship and the crippling of 2 escort destroyers forced the enemy to rethink their nighttime hit-and-run tactics. An intelligence officer reviewing Japanese logs made a note that always stuck with Keene's commanding officer. Enemy naval detachment suffered catastrophic outcome after engaging U.S. artillery unexpectedly capable of precise counterfire in fog. It wasn't true, of course. No artillery manual on Earth recommended anything Keene had done, but the psychological effect was real. Keene's shots had planted doubt in the minds of the enemy. Doubt in their charts, doubt in their night raider advantage, doubt in their own assumptions, and sometimes doubt is deadlier than fire. After the war, Daniel Keene returned to Oregon with little fanfare. He didn't seek recognition. He didn't lecture on trajectory physics or fog acoustics. He didn't tell embellished war stories at bars. He went back to the lumber yard he'd grown up in, cutting boards to exacting measurements, listening to the rhythm of saws and the grain of the wood like old friends. One day, a young worker, curious about Keene's service, asked, "Did you ever see the enemy up close?" Keene smiled faintly. "Not usually. The fog always got in the way." The young man laughed, thinking it was a joke. Keene didn't explain. A quiet heroism carried into history. Years later, when naval historians pieced together the raid, many dismissed the idea that a field gun played the decisive role. Ships sink from torpedoes. Ships sink from dive bombers. Ships sink from mines. But few stories, very few, include the line, "Ship disabled by a blind 105 millimeters shot from shore." Yet the wrecks at Cape Esperance said otherwise, and the men who were there said otherwise. Finch would later tell his grandson, he didn't see the ship, he didn't see the destroyers, but he saw the battlefield clearer than any of us. If this story moved you, do me a favor and hit that like button so more people discover these overlooked pieces of wartime history. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from and whether anyone in your family served. And if you enjoy cinematic war stories like this, subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss the next one, ***.